afternoon. I'm Dr. Adam DeVille, the Chairman of the Department of Philosophy and Theology, and I am delighted to welcome such a robust crowd to the inaugural lecture for our annual departmental lecture series. If this is any indication of how the rest of the year is going to go, then we are off to a very auspicious beginning. Before introducing our lecturer, at his request, I will open with a reflection that is drawn from his treatise on Providence by St. John Chrysostom. It's entitled, "Wait Till the End, and You Will Understand." Wait till the end, and you will see the outcome of events. Don't fuss, don't worry yet a while. Imagine someone who is not of the trade watching a blacksmith start melting down gold and mixing in ashes and straw. If he does not wait till the end, he will think that the poor piece of gold is going to be destroyed. Imagine someone else, born and bred on the sea, being suddenly landed on terra firma and not having the least notion about agriculture. He sees a farmer collecting grain and shutting it in a barn to protect it from damp. Then he sees this same farmer take the same grain and cast it to the winds, without worrying anymore about the dampness. Surely he will think that the farmer has ruined the grain, and he will reprove him. Is such reproof justified? Yes, it is, but not on grounds of fact, but because of the ignorance, the pride, and the rashness of the judgment made. Because if this individual, before committing himself, had waited for the summer, he would change his ideas. He would see the corn waving in the fields. He would see the farmer sharpening his scythe to reap the very grain that he had scattered and left to rot. He would see how greatly that grain had multiplied. Now, if the farmer waits all the winter, so much the more ought we to await the final outcome of events, remembering who it is that plows the soil of our souls. And when I speak of the final outcome, I am not referring to the end of this present life, but to the future life. God's plan for us aims at our salvation and glory. The prayers of our Father among the saints, John Chrysostom, John the Baptist, whose day this is, Lord Jesus Christ our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. It's my pleasure again to welcome you all here this afternoon to this presentation from Dr. Pearson, an assistant professor of philosophy in the Department of Philosophy and Theology here at the University of St. Francis, and the director of our undergraduate program in philosophy and of the liberal studies program. Some of his recent scholarly activity includes conference presentations at the Reinhardt Institute for Ethics and Leadership at Viterbo University, the biannual meeting of the Association of the Franciscan Colleges and Universities Summer Symposium, the biannual meeting of the Baptist Association of Philosophy Teachers at Union University, and the Midwest Regional Conference of the Society of Christian Philosophers at Georgetown College. In addition to all of his various responsibilities on campus, Dr. Pearson is also heading up an exciting new project, Living Your Call, Developing and Discerning Your Vocation. It's a new vocation discernment program here on campus that he would be happy to speak to you in more detail about after the lecture, particularly students. I think it's a very valuable program, not least in reminding us that vocation is more than simply a call to be a priest or a nun, important those are. His lecture this afternoon is entitled, "I'm Not Religious, But I'm Spiritual, and Other Odd Things We Say." Dr. Lewis Pearson.
Hello, everyone. I want to talk about a few things that often come up in conversation when people say they're churchgoers or that you meet a churchgoer. And most of this is going to come from personal experience, anecdotal experience I have from friends, from students. I don't know you, but I know me. So I'll talk about the things I've seen as these phrases have been used in conversation. I want to start with the phrase that was part of the title of this talk, "I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual," and what it is I think I'm saying when I say this sort of thing. Religion has kind of it's a loaded term. There's many loaded terms in our language, but religion, when I say something like this, if I say, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, I might have something like this in my mind, and I've said this in the past through my own journey. Religion seems to be kind of stilted. Right? Dogma is bad. Ritual is dead. Those things that seem sort of stuck and stayed, I want to avoid those. At the same time, I want to say that I realize there's some value in what it is that these religions do. So I throw my hat in the conversation by saying, but I am spiritual. I do think there's something here. And I think when I want to use the word spiritual, I mean something like, well, this seems like a freer word. Right? No one else's definitions are on it. It seems more spontaneous, which seems to be a sign of life. So not really thinking much about it, I just sort of rattle that phrase off. And I think that happens a lot with cliches in our common lingo. Right? They gain some kind of currency because there's some truth to them. But at a certain point, these become cliche, which means when you say them, you don't even hear what you're saying anymore. Cliche in many situations are things that shut down thought. It's another way of saying, okay, conversation over, right? So why does it matter? I mean, if people mean something like this, I think these things are important, but I really don't know much about what you think when you hear the word religion, so I'm going to avoid that word. Why would it be important for me to talk about, I think, rehabilitating the word religion in the way that at least I use my conversation, maybe the way you'll use the word in your conversation after this talk? Why would it be important to rehab this? Part of the reason, I think, is our words matter. They do things. There's no use reinventing words when we have words that are perfectly serviceable, especially when we have to explain our new definition every time we have a new conversation. We have words for older things. Here's some words for older things. Antiquated, outdated. Here's a phrase, behind the times. We have other words for older things. Let me try these out. Vintage, retro, classic, timeless. Very different connotations between antiquated and classic. Old things are going to be around. There are many good old things. But depending on the terminology we use and the cliche that gains cachet in our common conversation, I think we're more or less willing to be open to older things being valuable for us. I think religion is going to be a word like this, if it's not already. If we give up the word religious as being synonymous with outdated, behind the times, as opposed to being something like timeless or classic, I think it's the first step towards missing the fact that religion as a shared practice among a people, instead of just an individual take on reality. That religion is an indispensable thing. It's a life-giving thing. And language and how we use it, as I said, I think is often the first step towards finding out how we're going to live our lives. The way we speak, so follows the way we live. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to start from what I know and how I've used this word, not knowing how you all have used this word or heard it used. If you hear something that sounds familiar, take that to heart. Think about what this may mean. But what I'm providing here hopefully will be of some use to you, even if it may not directly speak to your own experience in every point. So, what I say to a person who asks, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, there's many things it might mean. If the person himself understands what religion is for, it might be an immediate turnoff, right? Let's say I'm saying this to a priest. Well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, Father, so, I do care about what you do. I put up for you all a short outline of where I'm talking. I wanted to put this up because I hope my comments only last about 20, 25 minutes. There are classes going on. Afterwards, I'll have a little break, so people who need to go off to classes and meetings, you can, and there's going to be question and answer for that. So this will give you some mental note of how far along I am in the comments that I've prepared. It might mean I'm ignorant. So I have a couple examples for each of these. I betray an ignorance when I say this, possibly. At least that's a message I communicate, even when I don't intend it. And the example I had in mind was when I first learned how to give a proper handshake in high school. It was sophomore year. My U.S. history teacher shook my hand. It was like a break or something. See you later, Mr. Pearson. They called us all by our last names, and shook his hand. And as I'm trying to leave, he stopped me and said, no, Pearson, come back here. Pearson, this is what you just did. Have a good weekend, Pearson. And I gave him this kind of, he said, it was just like shaking a wet fish. You just kind of did that at me. And, right, I'd always heard give a firm handshake. I just thought that was a way of showing how macho you were. I didn't understand why it's important to give a proper handshake. Well, handshake is a certain kind of ritual in American culture. I mean, people would think I was either odd or Japanese if I bowed every time I saw you. Handshakes and hugs, right? These are things that we share that allow us to have interaction as a society. So he started to explain to me what was wrong with what I did. Now, my thinking was, I am half Japanese, right? I'm used to not offending. Bowing is one way of not touching and making a greeting and showing respect. So I thought, well, if we have to touch, I'll make it as gentle as possible. You do whatever you want to with my hand. Right? And what he explained to me was, this is what you're communicating. You didn't intend it. I don't really want to touch you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't care to be here, so just, do what you want and then leave me alone. A firm handshake is not one where you try to show the person that you can break his hand. It's one to show your presence, to show your kind of embrace without hugging. Not everyone's a hugger. But it was kind of a lesson to me. For years I thought, man, I've been giving people wet fish the whole time, and I didn't know this is the message I'm giving. But this is what I mean when I say, if we say phrases like this is the thing about ignorance. We don't often know that we don't know. And so if I say something like, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, I may be communicating, I really don't know anything about all the stuff that you do as a people, as a church. And so I'm just saying it's not for me. It might actually be for me, I just didn't know it. Another possible unintended message I might communicate, again, depending on the person I'm talking to, arrogance. Here's an example. Let's say I have a grandfather who's wise and loving, and I say to him, and I say to other people who ever ask me about Grandpa, I respect him, I admire him. And I never do anything he tells me. I never follow any of his advice. Right? On the one hand, this is why I say it's something like saying I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. Right? I respect what Grandpa has done with his life, who he is as a person, but everything he says is stupid, right? It's not for me. He doesn't know the world I live in today. I say I respect, but in a very profound way, I fail to do so. If he's saying things to me for my good, and I interpret this way, thanks, Grandpa, that's nice. Right? My words say one thing, and my response to his advice says another thing. I'm hurt. This is a possible message I may communicate. And this is related to another phrase I'll be talking about very shortly. I don't have to go to church to be a good person. It could be that I didn't have a good grandpa growing up. I'm scandalized by the poor witness that people who call themselves religious have provided for me. And so I think to myself, there is a God. A relationship with this God who is sovereign over all things is important. And being united to other people who are united to this God, yeah, that's important for me too. But religion is the cause of strife, of oppression, of war. All the stuff I see about religion in media, the people I've known in my own church, they've been judgmental in a very bad, oppressive way. They're horrible people. So God, union with others, yes. But religion, if that's what it means, no. Very understandable reaction a person may have. And again, depending on the person you're talking to, hopefully the person is perceptive and charitable. It could be a message, if this is the kind of person you're talking to, a person's gone through this himself, that, oh, you've been hurt too. You may not have been hurt, but this is an unintended message that may be communicated if you say this to someone who's gone through something like this. Here's another possible unintended message. I'm controlling. I don't want your ritual, I want my ritual. You guys like shaking hands or bowing? I want to hit feet together. That's how we're doing things around here. You have your dogma, but I have my opinions about how things are going to go. I want them this way. I wanted to read a little quotation from a book by an author named G.K. Chesterton. This is a novel he wrote called The Ball and the Cross. And it has to do with what happens when a person attempts to reinvent the wheel. The plot of this book is that there's two Scotsmen. There is a Highland Scot, sort of country bumpkin, fresh from the Highlands, who comes to the big city, a very devout, practicing Catholic, who comes face to face with an editor of an atheist newspaper that's constantly trying to denigrate and destroy religious practice. They realize that each has insulted the other. Actually, the thing starts with the Highland country bumpkin coming down and sort of mindlessly reading on the window of the editor's office. He's waiting for church to start. Something comparing the Virgin Mary to some kind of fertility goddess. And it dawns on him what he's reading. He smashes the window with his walking stick. He jumps through it. And he says to the editor of the paper, "Stand up, you crapulous coward, and fight. How dare you insult my mother like that?" And at this moment, the editor gets a fire in his eye. He thinks, finally, someone who takes seriously my newspaper. Because up to this point, this atheist editor has been tired of people saying, "Why do you care about religion so much?" No one really cares about what he has to say because they don't think the subject matters at all. And so in a sense, these two kindred spirits, these people who realize this question matters. Who is God? Is he real? And what does he mean to us? Whether you get this right or wrong is something that should be important to you. And so they agree to have a duel to the death. Their problem is all of England is trying to stop it, because all of England tells them this is not something worth fighting over. So this novel is about their adventures of trying to get away so they can kill each other. So here's an interlude. This is from chapter 8. This is the believer speaking to the atheist editor. "You hold that your heretics and skeptics have helped the world forward and handed on a lamp of progress. I deny it. Nothing is plainer from real history than that each of your heretics invented a complete cosmos of his own, which the next heretic smashed entirely to pieces. Who knows exactly what the heretic Nestorius taught? Who cares? There are only two things that we know for certain about it. The first is that Nestorius, as a heretic, taught something quite opposite to the teaching of Arius, the heretic who came before him, and something quite useless to you, the heretic who comes after. I defy you to go back to the so-called free thinkers of the past and find any habitation for yourself at all. I defy you to read Godwin or Shelley or the deists of the 18th century or the nature-worshipping humanists of the Renaissance without discovering that you differ from them twice as much as you differ from the Pope. You were a 19th century skeptic. You were always telling me I ignore the cruelty of nature. If you had been an 18th century skeptic, you would be telling me I ignore the kindness and benevolence of nature." He goes on, and the conclusion of his part before the conversation turns over to the editor is, there are only two things that really progress. They both accept accumulations of authority. They may be progressing uphill or down, growing steadily better or steadily worse, but they have steadily increased in certain definable matters. They have steadily advanced in a certain definable direction. They are the only two things, it seems to me, that ever can progress. The first is physical science, the second is the Catholic Church. And then they blow up in a giant conversation here. There's a summary that Chesterton writes about this point. This is sort of the fictional version of the summary. This is from chapter 12 of his book, Heretics. "I do not know by what extraordinary mental accident modern writers so constantly connect the idea of progress with the idea of independent thinking. Progress is obviously the antithesis of independent thinking. For under independent or individualistic thinking, every man starts at the beginning and goes in all probability just as far as his father before him. If there really be anything of the nature of progress, it must mean, above all things, the careful study and assumption of what one's father has done before oneself." So what I'm saying here with this last point, I'm controlling, many times when we're faced with a new practice, a new dogma, a new claim about the nature of God, the nature of how we're related to God, we may respond with docility and see there's a reason this person who has some kind of teaching authority over me is telling me this. We may respond, however, with rebellion, saying, well, maybe there's a problem with this person's teaching, maybe there's a problem with what he's saying, it doesn't sound right. But in any case, I don't think there's anything necessarily wicked about it. We just want to stand with what looks true and not all the things that we hear from religion often sound true to us. And so we go about what it turns out to be, reinventing the wheel when it feels to us like tracking truth. But in any case, depending on the person you're speaking to, it may come across as a controlling statement you make when you say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. The person may think you're saying something like, I like to have religion on my own terms, whatever that might mean, however I'd like to define it for myself. Now, this is related to the second point, the second saying that often comes up. I don't have to go to church to be a good person. So what I think I'm saying, I think is similar to what I talked about before when I say I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. That I can be a good person, not just the typical, you might say, natural virtues of being just, wise, courageous, moderate, but I might even think I can be a godly person, right? Not having to go to church and still being this. What unintended messages do I communicate if I say this to people? Depending on who they are, some of them will be similar to the points that we saw above. With regard to being controlling, it might come across as saying, unintentionally, I'm lazy or I'm selfish. A couple examples as analogy to get across the point I'm trying to make. Let's say my wife says, I know, right, Lewis, you like to be with us, the family, spend time with me, spend time with the kids, you spend time with my parents. You try to spend time with all of us whenever you can, but just to make sure things don't fall between the cracks, let's schedule this. Put it on your Outlook schedule now. An hour of time with the family. My parents, the kids, everybody. It's a reasonable request. Now, if I said to her, well, honey, I do, as you said, hang out with you and your in-laws, my in-laws and the kids, hang out with you guys all the time. I don't have to do this weekly thing to be a good husband. I think it's becoming clear with this example, maybe, but I certainly am a selfish husband, or a husband who wants things on my own terms. Relationships demand things of us. Right? They're not just whatever we want. Relationships aren't a matter of being stimulated by something that gives us pleasure, although hopefully pleasure is part of good relationships. Relationships involve two people, and demands will be made when there is a relationship that's a healthy one. There can be unhealthy demands. But I think it's clear that although I can be a good husband, father, son-in-law in many instances, it's not necessarily just about being those things on my own terms. If someone I'm in relationship with asks of me to meet, being a good husband, son-in-law, father means responding properly to those requests, responding with compliance if they're reasonable and good requests. Here's another example from a kind of alternate angle. So when my dad would call me to supper, say, son, get to the table. Time to pray. And I say to Dad, I'll be there soon. You guys go on without me. I can pray on my own. Again, it may be true, like saying, I don't have to go to church to be a good person, even maybe a godly person. Having a prayer life is not necessarily the point, though it's connected to what my father's asked me to do. There's something that's not firing on all cylinders in my family if it's just a matter of all the kids saying, well, I know Dad said this, and it's not just for my good, but he wants the family to be together for this prayer together. Still, I know better than Dad, right? I'm busy with what I'm doing now, and Dad just wants me to pray. I'm doing that too. So depending on who you're talking to, saying something like this may have this unintended message that's communicated. And the last point I want to make has to do with this last saying, I can pray wherever I want. Again, you can hopefully see these are all connected things. Again, what I think I'm saying is, I know that my relationship with God, who is sovereign over all things, who is everywhere, his presence is greater or lesser in different places, right? But his presence is nevertheless in all places. My prayer life doesn't begin and end in a building at a certain time. So when I say this, I might be trying to communicate an embrace of this understanding of God's hold in my life and his place in my life. What might I be communicating unintentionally? Similar to above, right? If it turns out that this is a command that's been given to me to worship together with his family in a regular fashion, it's not for him. He's not like a pagan god who demands sacrifice for some strange reason. It's for me. There's something about me that he knows needs this, not just on my own terms. He's the one who's giving me these terms. And these terms, for some reason, involve other people, which I might not like. I'll have to say I'm a recovering loner in this regard. I think the nice, acceptable term these days is introvert. I think the ancients would have called it misanthrope. I'm more of a misanthrope, or at least, as I said, I'm a recovering one. I'd like to compare what a person says here to what a person might say with regard to singing. I personally like singing. I sing all the time. I even subject my students to it sometimes in class. I don't know if anyone's been in here when I did that. In any case, it might be something like this. I can sing wherever I want. This is true. But consider this. If I found other people to sing with, let's say 3 other guys, we start some kind of 4-part harmony band, there are things I can do with these 3 other people that I cannot do on my own. The kind of harmony I can get with these 3 others is something that is special. It's going to require some practice, though, right? Some kind of working together, choosing a song beforehand, making sure that we have the same notes in the same order. Consider also, I could choose to be part of a choir, 40-person choir, up in the stakes by 10 now. The kind of singing I can do in this group, again, is going to be an even greater complexity. It's also going to require even more practice and planning. If anyone's ever been part of something like an orchestra, a marching band, a choir, you know what I'm talking about. In fact, if you've been part of any kind of group project, you know what I'm talking about. As a recovering loner, I really liked individual sports, hated team sports. So I was in wrestling. It's the team sport because all the points add up, but really it's just me and the opponent, right? I had to come to love soccer because I have to actually rely on other people. And not only do I have to rely on them, I have to play my part. There are demands on me as a player to fit into the strategy. So I can't just do whatever I want. I actually have to do something to make the team as a whole function properly. So one unintended message I may communicate if I say something like I pray wherever I want is, I'm a loner. I'm fine with my life firing just on 2 cylinders. Nothing wrong with praying wherever you want. Nothing wrong with my wanting to sing wherever I want. But how much richer is life if I can sing with a band and sing with a choir? I can have all these parts of my life where music has more demands on me, more time, more practice, but also more beauty and more complexity. So to have certain requirements, my wife tells me for my family, my church tells me for proper participation in its shared life, isn't telling me I can't do this on my own, but is telling me one of the many features of a full, rich life that I can participate in if I want to. We've been made part of a family when we're part of a church. It's described, I think, not just metaphorically, but literally as a wedding feast. So when people mention religion, I challenge not just you, but myself included as a recovering loner and misanthrope, to realize it's not a bad word. Religion is a reference to something that people have shared across space and time, across geographies and cultures. It's a universal feature of human experience, and for good reason. I'd like to conclude with a passage from Revelation, which reminds us not only of our being a people of God, not just a person with a specific individual relationship, though that's there, but also to remind us that the Alpha of the ancient is, was, and will be the Omega of the new. When we worry about religion being old, outdated, and stilted, and spiritual being the new life of our relationship with God, it may turn out that religion can give us both of these things. This is from Revelation 21, starting at verse 2. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. He who sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. Also he said, Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without price from the fountain of the water of life. He who conquers shall have this heritage. I will be his God. He shall be my son. Amen. That concludes my part. So thanks for being an attentive audience. If you have classes, meetings to go to, feel free. If you'd like to stay for some of the questions, but classes creep up, you can leave in the middle. But at this time, we have time for, how are we doing? I'd say about 15 minutes worth of question and answer time. So anyone who'd like to, feel free, and I'll call on you. Okay, what's your name, sir?
Ed Morris. Ed Morris wonders, Doctor, a lot of people seem to go through the procedure of going to church, being religious, following the tenets of their church. But did you ever take a survey how many are really spiritual?
I have a friend who jokes about that on Facebook. His line is, I'm not spiritual, but I'm religious. Yeah. This is also a problem, to be scandalized. So someone might say I'm not religious because they've been hurt in a church. But this happens too. I remember, this is middle school, high school. I had a friend, when I'd spend the night at his house over the weekend, I'd go to his church. And he was struggling with the faith. And he didn't know why I was so gung-ho for it. Like, why are you paying attention? My parents dragged us here this morning. And we had a conversation afterward, and he said, did you look around? You see that person was yawning and checking texts? And why is it you care so much that, all these other people don't seem to? I think you're right, it's there. My response to him was, well, why are you paying attention to them instead of yourself? But this he got right. There's something about us as a community. It can't just be about me hanging out with a bunch of people who don't care about it. I think the point I made earlier about team sports might have a role here. I think in situations where I don't want to be part of things with the family, I feel like they're holding me back. They're making demands on me that are unreasonable. It may in fact turn out to be I'm the one who's dragging the family down. I'm being the spoiled sport. And there may be things I can do that they want, that they'll benefit from, that I'm begrudging them because I'm looking at them as the problem. So, there may be what do you call them? Lots of canker sores in the body of Christ, just kind of hanging out, sitting like lumps. But if the church is a body and we're all part of it, I suppose what you individually can do about it is, I don't know, help to be an instrument of life, invigorating it again. I'm not sure if the question was there, if I'm answering a question, but yeah, I think that's true. There is definitely this population in many churches, people who do it just because they do it, just because that's how they were raised, but not because of any internal conviction that this is part of a fully lived life. More did you want to say about that?
Well, yeah, the thing that strikes me is there's one person in history, the Christian religion, that really hits me, and that was St. John the Baptist. Now, the hermit type of individual, living out in the desert. His food was austere, probably devoted most of his time to spiritual thinking, and in the end, he lost his head over it.
Yeah, today's the feast day of the beheading of John the Baptist, so it's very
He lost his head,
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Well, when you talked about relationship, I thought that was so key because when I heard these terms, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, or I don't have to go to church, it took away their accountability. And when you are in a relationship, like you said, you have a responsibility, you have an accountability, and I see today, it seems to me like this rational, I don't have to go to church all the time. There's a positive, and you were so good at putting the positive and the negative. You can say, I don't have to go to church to be a good person. That's true. But you don't have to not go to church either to be a good person. And you can be accountable for what you're going to get out of the church by what you put in. And a lot of times I don't hear accountability. I hear rational for just rebelling against something or not being obedient to something.
Yeah.
And I think you did such a really beautiful job of showing two sides of each of those points. And I've always always heard those points used to rationale why somebody, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual.
Yeah.
So
Well, thanks. Yeah.
That's my answer. So what?
Yeah.
What is your point?
Yeah.
And you ask them that, and it's like if you pull a rug kind of out from under you, you blew it apart. What they were, it's just a not be accountable sometimes. Yeah. I hear this.
Well, I want to thank you for making explicit 2 points. One was, yeah, sometimes there is this uncharitable inference that when someone says I don't have to go to a church to be a good person, they might be implying people who go to church are bad people. So, right. So I like that you made explicit that point. And also the other point that a person may not mean it, but come across as saying, I'm lazy, I don't want to have to give an account for my beliefs in my life. I know personally, I've been convicted realizing this. In situations where I say things like this, where I'm trying to say, I think this is an important thing, but I don't want to have to talk to you about this. I realize what it means is I don't want to have to be accountable for how I am living my life. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you want to say I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual and really mean it, I want to hear it.
Yeah.
Because I think that there is a level there that you do graduate from. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be religious. I think you need the doctrine, you need that guidance. It's like, oh, yeah. I mean, maybe not need is the right word, but I'm going to take advantage of it as long as it's there. But it doesn't mean that I have to say that in a negative way. I can say it in a positive way. I need to be a little less religious and a little more spiritual.
Yeah. And I think it's only in asking questions that you find out, well, what does the person think he's saying here? As you said, sometimes it's just covering over. If it's genuine ignorance, they really do think this life is important. And they say, I didn't know that you do this in religion. It's a teaching moment there, yeah. Yeah. Was there another?
My name is David Field.
Hey, David.
The core of what you've got there is what I think I'm saying. If I can discern what you think, and I say that, then I'm shining your shoes. And you don't know what I think, because I'm not going to tell you. I mean, there's this basic discontinuity between the mind of man and that which is created in the mind of God, and that which is created on the other hand. And the Catholicism course, which I took religiously last year, I was devoted, but not obedient. There was a whole series of films about the glory of God embodied almost entirely in architecture. Glorious, expensive, elaborate architecture. So the resources of Christianity are flowing into real estate and the acquisition of buildings. That's the work of the mind of man. Beautiful, beautiful things. On the other hand, there's the mind of God, which is, what about the widows and the orphans? Because way back there somewhere, that was what was given up in order to get all this fancy stuff. As a modern man, I'm not impressed with all your fancy stuff. To me, that's corruption. That is the road to doom. What about the widows and the orphans? We look at the world and say, well, I can't believe in God. Look at all the people who starved to death. Look at all the suffering. Well, yes, it's true. But look at the money. How much money would it take to remedy these bills? The money that flows into the coffers of Christianity, that's how much. Which is being, to raise the self-esteem of these leaders, to say, follow me, I will lead you to God. Be silent, I will speak. Be obedient, and come faithfully. And don't forget your money.
Right. We had these conversations last year when we had the video series, I remember.
So the underlying struggle is profound. Right. It's not one of a choice of styles of point of view and literary likes and dislikes.
No, that's right. Yeah, so this is not a small point. So the point being, if a person says this, they may be scandalized not by being hurt in some particular way that's personal, but hurt in a kind of cry out for help for the widow and the orphan, as you mentioned. So you see religion, and all you think you're seeing is, all you see when you see it is waste, pomp, and the works of the devil, right? So.
No, works of the mind of man.
Works of the mind of man.
Devil's got his own
Yeah.
empire, you know.
Yeah. I was thinking of, I've got friends who, I did a graduate work at Baylor University, a Baptist university, so I made really great friends. It was interesting finding out what Protestants and Catholics mean when we use the same words. And they don't always come across the same way. So when I would go into I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Memphis, Tennessee, and I saw the beauty there, the work that people have put in, the devotion. I thought, clearly there's something here. These people love God. And I had the exact same building that a friend of mine would come into, and he'd say, look at all of this pomp. Look at all of this, this waste, this idolatry. But yeah, interesting when you see this, like the word religion, depending on a person's background experience and proclivities, as he sees it, will interpret a certain way. And so an unintended message a person might be communicating with this, if he's speaking to you, you might think, right on. Forget about all that real estate. You're right.
But look at reality. You have to look at the facts. You go right down to it, you're looking at life and death, you're looking at socioeconomic realities, you're looking at hungry people. You know, those are the absolute basic facts of life that must be accounted for in your elaborate theories.
Right. But David, we talked about this last year with the amount of charity work, the real budget that goes into real estate. It's not a dichotomy of the either or. You're robbing widows and orphans to have a beautiful chalice. But I don't want to cut you off now. I know I'm saying this just because I know we've had these conversations together. But wondering if we have a time for maybe one or two more questions. But yeah, thanks for that.
What's your definition of spirituality?
Having to do with the spirit. So just very generic, right? Having to do not with the physical, but with the spiritual. And so that can be whatever. I mean, well, the demons are spiritual. So are the angels. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, when I think of superfluous religion, I think of Cardinal Richelieu.
Okay.
And when I think of spiritual, I think of St. Francis.
Okay. Okay.
You know, they almost define.
Right. Yeah. So again, the connotation these words have for us as they've been developing in our common conversations. And I think it also highlights again the point I had that if we start to think anytime I hear the word religion, there's at least an edge of connotation, oppression, something about it that I can't live in, that doesn't have life in it, that doesn't give life. That's something to watch for. It's not just a semantic point, but it's a very important point that gives us a cue for how we decide to start living our lives. I think you're right about thinking those. Yeah, last question here. Go ahead.
It seems to me that all of those questions are based on what you were talking about being alone, as opposed to the religion that Jesus brought us was of the people for the group, and all of these cut that off.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know how much of it's American individualism that makes it difficult to plug into a covenant, right? A group way of being dealt with and of living together. But I think, yeah, it's a good point to bring up. I didn't mean to cut you off either. If you had another.
No.
Okay.
That was just what I'm seeing in those verses.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you for your attention and your questions and your thoughts. Have a good day, everyone. Yeah.